The first thing I noticed was the scarf. Not because it was particularly flashy, but because Megan never wore scarves. She hated them, said they made her feel like she was being strangled. But there it was, deep blue, wrapped loosely around her neck as she got out of the cab. She waved at me with her free hand, a small travel bag slung over her shoulder, and for a moment, she looked like someone I didn't quite recognize. It was unsettling. "Missed me," she called out, flashing the easy smile that always melted me. I shrugged it off, figuring she picked up the scarf during her Silicon Valley trip. Maybe it was a gift from a client or something she grabbed to blend in with the tech crowd. "Of course," I said, pulling her in for a kiss. Her lips were warm, her hands colder than usual, but it was still Megan, my wife of 6 years, the woman I'd built my life with. She smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize, something musky and new. "Nice scarf," I said, half joking. "Trying out a new look?" She laughed, tugging it loose. "Oh, just something to cover up a rash. I think the dry air out there didn't agree with me." Fair enough, I thought. I didn't think much more of it. But the scarf wasn't the only thing that didn't add up. That night, Megan unpacked with an energy that didn't match her usual post-travel exhaustion. She buzzed around the bedroom, telling me about keynote speakers and cutting-edge AI panels, but her words were rushed, rehearsed even. Her excitement felt scripted. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The next day, I got a call from my buddy Dan. We worked together in IT, and while I loved Megan, Dan was the guy I trusted most to keep me sane. He'd been joking all week about how I should have joined Megan on her trip just to escape the monotony of our office grind. "You're not gonna believe this," Dan said, laughing into the phone. "What? You know Megan's Silicon Valley trip? I just got an email from a buddy out there. Apparently, the tech conference she went to was cancelled last minute. Something about a venue issue." I paused, my mind racing. "What are you talking about? She was there all week." That's what I thought, too. Weird, right? Weird didn't even begin to cover it. That night, over dinner, I casually asked Megan about her trip again. "So, what was the conference center like? Big crowds?" She hesitated for a split second before answering, "Oh, it was massive. Packed with people. They had this incredible light show during the opening ceremony." Her answer was so specific it felt defensive. My stomach nodded. I didn't say anything else, but something had shifted. A small thread had been pulled, and I was about to unravel the whole sweater. Whatever Megan had been up to in Silicon Valley, it wasn't attending a conference. And I was determined to find out what. I didn't consider myself a paranoid guy. Sure, I had a logical mind, working in IT and all, but I wasn't the type to dive into conspiracy theories or jump to conclusions. But when Dan dropped that bombshell about the conference being cancelled, it was like a fire alarm had gone off in my head. I didn't react right away. Instead, I let it sit there, simmering while I tried to figure out what to do. If Megan wasn't at the conference, then where the hell had she been? That night, she acted like everything was normal, and I went along with it. I helped clean up after dinner, we watched half an episode of some streaming drama, and she went to bed early, claiming jet lag. She looked exhausted, but in a way that didn't seem physical. It was like she was drained from keeping a secret. I wasn't sure yet if that secret involved me, but I planned to find out. I stayed up late, replaying every conversation we'd had about her trip. She'd been so eager to share stories when she got back, but now that I thought about it, they were vague. She'd mentioned networking, but no specific names. Great panels, but no real topics. The scarf excuse stuck with me, too. Megan hated anything around her neck, so why the sudden change? I opened my laptop, logged into my email, and started searching for anything related to the cancelled conference. I was thorough, combing through event listings, tech forums, and even local news in Silicon Valley. Dan was right, the event was officially cancelled a week before it was supposed to happen. There had been emails sent out to registered attendees, all of whom were promised refunds and free access to the next year's conference. I didn't see Megan's name on any lists, but I found something else. A picture from a local tech blog, taken outside one of the alternate venues where smaller groups had gathered for impromptu meetups. It wasn't a clear shot, but there she was in the background, unmistakable in her bright red coat. She wasn't alone. Standing next to her were two men, one holding a laptop, the other leaning casually against the wall, looking at her like she was the most fascinating person on earth. I stared at the image for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Who were these guys? If the conference was cancelled, why was she even there? Was this just some work-related meetup, or something more? I couldn't tell yet, but the look on the guy's face bothered me. It was too familiar, too comfortable. The next morning, I decided to approach things carefully. Megan had already left for work by the time I got up, so I took my time getting ready. I wasn't scheduled to start until late, which gave me a few hours to dig deeper. I knew her schedule was packed, and she wouldn't notice if I poked around a bit. I started with the most obvious place, her suitcase. It was still sitting in the corner of the bedroom, half unpacked. Megan wasn't the type to leave things out of order, so this in itself was unusual. I opened it carefully, as if disturbing the contents might break the fragile illusion of normalcy we were clinging to. Inside, I found the usual mix of clothes, toiletries, and souvenirs: a mug with a Silicon Valley slogan, a couple of tech company pens, and a guidebook to the area. None of it seemed out of place until I reached the bottom. There, tucked beneath a folded sweater, was an envelope with a hotel logo printed on the front. I pulled it out, my heart pounding. The envelope contained a receipt for her stay at a boutique hotel, dated during her trip. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stay at if your company was footing the bill. This was a luxury spot, the type with a spa and personalized service. But the most alarming detail was the room reservation. It was for 2 adults. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the receipt. My first thought was that this had to be a mistake. Maybe the hotel had messed up the paperwork, or maybe Megan had shared a room with a coworker to cut costs. But that didn't explain why she hadn't mentioned the hotel at all. If she wasn't at the conference, then what the hell was she doing at a place like this? The next clue came when I checked our shared bank account. Megan rarely used her personal card for work trips, so I figured the charges would show up here. Sure enough, there was a payment to the hotel, along with several charges for meals at upscale restaurants. One charge stood out: a wine bar that didn't exactly scream networking event. I googled the name and found pictures of couples sipping cocktails in dimly lit booths. Not exactly the vibe of a professional retreat. By this point, I was spiraling. I wanted to call her, to demand an explanation, but I held back. I needed more. I needed to be absolutely certain before I confronted her. That evening, Megan came home later than usual. She seemed distracted, her smile forced when she greeted me. I asked how her day was, and she launched into a story about a difficult client. I nodded along, watching her closely. She didn't look like someone hiding a guilty conscience, but maybe she was just better at lying than I'd given her credit for. After dinner, while she showered, I made my move. Her work bag was sitting on the kitchen counter, and I knew she always kept her laptop in there. I opened it quickly, my hands shaking, and found what I was looking for: her personal notebook. Flipping through the pages, I found a section labeled Silicon Valley. Most of it was just scribbled notes and doodles, but one line caught my attention: lunch with Aaron and Chris, discuss app ideas. Aaron and Chris. 2 names. 2 men. I didn't know who they were yet, but I was going to find out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Megan was beside me, breathing evenly, completely unaware that I'd spent the evening unraveling the threads of her lies. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief, but mostly I felt hollow. The life I thought I knew was starting to collapse, and the worst part was that I had no idea how deep this went. I wasn't just chasing answers anymore, I was chasing the truth about my own life. The next day, I called Dan and asked him to meet for coffee. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me piece this mess together. By the time I hung up, I had a plan. If Megan wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. When I walked into the cafe that afternoon to meet Dan, I felt like I was carrying the weight of 100 unsaid things. My mind was a tangled mess of questions, accusations, and possibilities I didn't want to face. Dan was already there, sipping his usual black coffee. He waved me over to his table, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Man, you look like hell," he said, giving me a once-over. "Rough day?" "You could say that," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. I didn't waste time with small talk. "I need your help with something. It's about Megan." Dan raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I pulled the hotel receipt and my phone out of my bag, laying them on the table like evidence in a trial. "She stayed at this hotel in Silicon Valley," I began, keeping my voice low. "It wasn't a work expense, and the reservation was for 2 people. Dan frowned, picking up the receipt to examine it. "Okay, that's weird. Maybe she..." "There's more," I cut in, scrolling to a photo of the men in the tech blog picture. "These guys. Aaron and Chris." She wrote their names in her notebook, said something about meeting them to discuss app ideas. "Does this look like business to you?" Dan took a long look at the picture before setting the phone down. His usual joking demeanor was gone, replaced by a seriousness that made me uncomfortable. "All right, I'll be honest. It doesn't look great. But are you sure this isn't all just..." "I don't know, some misunderstanding? Megan doesn't strike me as the type." "I don't know what type she is anymore," I snapped, leaning back in my chair. "That's the problem. She lied about the conference, Dan. Why would she do that if everything was above board?" Dan didn't have an answer, and neither did I. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "So, what's your plan? You're not just gonna sit on this, are you?" "Of course not," I said. "I'm going to confront her. Tonight." By the time I got home, my nerves were shot. I'd spent the drive rehearsing what I was going to say, but now that I was standing in our living room, all those carefully planned words seemed inadequate. Megan was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I walked in, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey, you're back early," she said. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, my voice tight. "We need to talk." Her hands froze mid-chop. She turned to face me, her expression curious but wary. "What's up?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the hotel receipt, placing it on the counter between us. Her eyes flicked to it, and I saw a flash of recognition before she quickly looked back at me. "What's this?" she asked, feigning confusion. "You tell me," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You stayed at this hotel in Silicon Valley." "Not for the conference, because that was cancelled." "So what were you doing there, Megan? And who were you with?" Her face went pale, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, setting the knife down. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because right now, it looks like you lied to me about your entire trip." She hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. I was meeting some people about a potential side project, something separate from my job." "People like Aaron and Chris?" I pressed. "The ones you were having lunch with?" Her eyes widened slightly, and I knew I'd caught her off guard. "You went through my things?" "Damn right I did," I snapped. "Because you were acting suspicious, Megan. And now I find out you're staying at luxury hotels and meeting with people you didn't even bother to mention? What the hell is going on?" She finally met my gaze, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Okay, yes, I met Aaron and Chris. They're developers working on an app, and they wanted my input on the marketing side. It was supposed to be a discreet thing, nothing serious. That's why I didn't bring it up." "Discreet," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "Is that what you call sharing a hotel room with them?" Her jaw tightened. "I didn't share a room with anyone. I booked the room for myself because I wanted to stay somewhere nice for a change." "Is that such a crime?" "Don't play dumb with me, Megan," I said, my voice rising. "The reservation was for 2 adults." 2. Who was the second person? She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it again, shaking her head.
I don't have to explain myself to you. I didn't do anything wrong. I laughed bitterly. You think lying to your husband isn't wrong? Hiding things like this isn't wrong?
Stop twisting this into something it's not, she shot back, her tone defensive.
I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact like you're doing right now. Overreact? I echoed, my anger boiling over.
I'm overreacting because my wife is lying to me, sneaking around with two guys, and pretending everything's fine.
Do you have any idea how that feels?
Her face softened slightly, but I wasn't buying the act. I'm sorry, she said quietly.
I should have told you about the app project.
But I swear, nothing inappropriate happened. I stared at her, searching for any sign that she was telling the truth. But all I could see was the same woman who'd lied to my face for weeks. I didn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't sure if I ever could.
Is that everything? I asked coldly.
Because if you're hiding anything else, now's the time to come clean. She shook her head.
That's it. I promise. But her promises didn't mean much anymore.
Later that night, after Megan had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the hotel receipt on the coffee table. Her excuses had been rehearsed, her tone calculated.
I didn't buy a word of it. I grabbed my laptop and started typing an email. If Megan wasn't going to tell me the truth, then maybe Aaron and Chris would.
I wasn't about to let this go, not until I had all the answers.
Sending the emails to Aaron and Chris had been a gamble.
I kept them polite, posing as a concerned husband curious about the nature of Megan's work with them. I wasn't sure if they'd respond or just ignore me entirely. To my surprise, both replied within a day.
Aaron's response was brief and formal. He assured me that nothing inappropriate had happened, stating that Megan's involvement was strictly professional. She provided some initial input on our app's branding and marketing, he wrote.
We appreciated her perspective, but that was the extent of her involvement. Chris, on the other hand, was more verbose. His email was filled with unnecessary details, almost like he was trying too hard to appear casual. He echoed Aaron's statements about the professional nature of their interactions but added an odd remark about how much they all respected Megan's dedication and intelligence. At first glance, their responses seemed reassuring.
But when I compared them, subtle discrepancies started to emerge.
Aaron mentioned that they'd only met with Megan twice during her trip, while Chris implied that their meetings were more frequent. Aaron's email was adamant that the hotel stay was unrelated to their work, but Chris didn't even address it. It felt off, as if they'd coordinated their answers but hadn't gotten their story straight. I couldn't shake the feeling that Megan had warned them I might reach out.
Their responses were too quick, too smooth.
Still, I knew I couldn't confront her again without solid evidence. So, I decided to take a different approach. I'd play along.
That evening, I apologized to Megan.
I made it as believable as I could, telling her that I'd overreacted out of insecurity and that I believed her explanations now. I even threw in a comment about how much I admired her ambition and her ability to juggle multiple projects. She seemed relieved, though her reaction was cautious. I appreciate you saying that, she said softly.
I know things have been tense lately, but I promise there's nothing going on.
You can trust me.
I nodded, forcing a smile. I do. I just let my imagination run wild. I'm sorry for doubting you.
To sell the act, I made a conscious effort to be more affectionate over the next few days. I cooked dinner, suggested movie nights, and even brought home her favorite bottle of wine.
Megan responded positively, and for a moment, things felt almost normal again. But I wasn't fooled.
Beneath the surface, I was watching her every move. Over the next few weeks, I paid close attention to Megan's habits. I wasn't proud of it, but I started monitoring her phone and laptop whenever I got the chance. She wasn't careless, her devices were password protected, and she was quick to lock them whenever she left the room. But I noticed patterns, late-night texting, frequent email notifications, and a growing attachment to her phone that seemed unusual even for her. One evening, while she was showering, I managed to access her laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just a sign, a slip-up, anything that would confirm my suspicions. I searched her recent files, emails, and browser history but found nothing incriminating. She was either incredibly cautious or she'd deleted anything suspicious. But then, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Work Miscellaneous. It seemed innocuous, but something about it caught my attention. Inside, I found a series of files with generic names like Notes 1 and Ideas 3. One file, however, stood out, Dinner Meeting. Docs. I opened it, my heart pounding. The document was a set of notes from a meeting Megan had attended, but it wasn't related to her usual work. It mentioned Aaron and Chris by name, along with several other individuals I didn't recognize. The notes were vague, filled with jargon about monetization strategies and user acquisition models, but one line at the bottom caught my eye: discuss further in person. Chris suggests private follow-up. I copied the file to a USB drive and closed it, my hands trembling. It wasn't definitive proof of wrongdoing, but it was enough to confirm that Megan hadn't been entirely honest with me. The next step was subtle surveillance. I installed a tracking app on Megan's phone, something discreet that wouldn't show up unless she actively searched for it. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to know the truth. Over the next week, the app provided me with a detailed record of her calls, messages, and locations. Most of it was mundane work emails, calls to her sister, a trip to the grocery store. But then I noticed something odd: Megan had started visiting a co-working space downtown. She didn't mention it to me, and it wasn't her usual workplace. She went there twice that week, both times staying for hours. I decided to check it out for myself. The next time she said she was running errands, I followed her. Parking a safe distance away, I watched as she entered the building and headed upstairs. I waited for nearly 3 hours, unsure of what to expect. When she finally came out, she wasn't alone. Aaron was with her. They didn't look particularly intimate, no touching, no lingering glances. But they were talking animatedly, laughing at something as they walked to his car. Megan got into the passenger seat, and they drove off together. I followed them to a small cafe on the edge of town. They sat at a corner table, their heads close as they talked. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me enough. They were comfortable with each other, too comfortable for my liking. That night, I didn't confront Megan. Instead, I acted like everything was fine, even though my mind was racing. I needed more time, more proof. If I accused her now, she'd deny it, just like before. I couldn't afford to make another mistake. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When Megan told me she had another work trip coming up, my instincts went into overdrive. This wasn't paranoia anymore, it was preparation. I couldn't let another business trip pass without knowing exactly what she was doing. Her reassurances meant nothing now. If she was lying to my face, I needed to hear it for myself. I spent the evening before her departure carefully preparing. The listening device was small, barely larger than a coin, and impossible to notice unless you were actively searching for it. I tested it multiple times to ensure it was working perfectly. The audio feed would stream directly to an app on my phone. I slipped the device into her travel bag, pressing it firmly under the fabric lining where it would never be found unless the bag was torn apart. The next morning, she left for her trip. I kissed her goodbye at the door, playing the supportive husband one last time. As soon as she drove away, I set up my laptop and phone, ready to monitor everything. I switched to remote work for the week so I could be home to listen without interruptions. At first, everything seemed normal. I could hear the hum of the car engine and the occasional shuffle of Megan moving things around in the car. She made a few phone calls, all business-related, discussing marketing strategies and quarterly reviews. She sounded professional, confident, exactly the way I'd expect her to sound if nothing were amiss. But then, about 4 hours into her drive, things started to shift. I heard her arrive at what I assumed was a hotel. The faint sound of a car door slamming was followed by footsteps, the scrape of a rolling suitcase, and the ding of an elevator. She seemed to check in without incident, and I listened as she entered her room, moving around to unpack her things. Curious to see how she'd respond to me in real time, I decided to text her.
Hey, how's the drive going? Did you make it to the hotel yet?
Her reply came almost instantly.
Megan not yet. Still stuck in traffic. Should be there soon.
My blood ran cold. I could hear her in the hotel room. She wasn't in traffic, she was lying to me. I muted the audio feed for a moment, staring at her message. My first instinct was to call her out on the lie immediately, but I knew better. I needed to hear more, to gather everything before I confronted her. I turned the audio feed back on and waited. An hour passed, then another. Megan left the room briefly, and I heard the sound of her footsteps echoing in a hallway. She must have gone to grab something, maybe a snack or a drink, because she returned shortly after. She made another call, this time speaking softly, her tone casual but unfamiliar. "I'm here," she said.
"Yeah, it went fine. The room's nice. When are you getting here?"
The person on the other end was male, his voice muffled and hard to make out. I couldn't catch his exact words, but Megan's responses were enough to paint a picture. "Okay, see you soon," she said before hanging up. I stared at the phone, my pulse quickening. This wasn't the kind of conversation you had with a coworker. Another half-hour passed before the next significant sound reached my ears, the click of the hotel room door opening. A man's voice greeted Megan, clearer this time. "Hey," he said, his tone warm, almost intimate. "Hey," she replied, a smile in her voice. The door shut, and I heard the rustle of bags being set down. They exchanged a few pleasantries about the trip, their voices low but relaxed. I strained to catch every word, my stomach twisting with each passing second. "Did you get everything sorted?" the man asked. "Yeah," Megan replied. "No issues. It's all set for tomorrow." Their conversation drifted into work-related topics for a while, but there was an underlying ease between them that made me uncomfortable. This wasn't just a professional relationship, it was too casual, too comfortable. And then, the laughter started. The sound of them laughing together was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't forced or polite, it was the kind of laughter that came from genuine connection, from shared moments I wasn't a part of. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my breathing steady. My phone buzzed with a notification, another text from Megan. Megan still stuck in traffic. Probably another hour or so. Love you. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost laughable. I muted the audio feed, unable to listen any longer. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. By the next morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her just yet, I needed to know exactly who this man was and what their relationship entailed. The listening device had given me enough to confirm my suspicions, but I wanted definitive proof. As I monitored the audio feed throughout the day, I heard more snippets of their interactions. They met in her room several times, discussing work occasionally but always slipping into more personal conversations. I learned his name, Chris. It was the same Chris from the emails, the same one who'd assured me nothing inappropriate was happening. His voice was smooth, confident, and entirely too familiar with my wife. I took detailed notes on everything I heard, timestamps included. This wasn't just about satisfying my own curiosity anymore, it was about building an undeniable case. When Megan finally returned home at the end of her business trip, I was ready. But I didn't show my hand right away. I greeted her with a smile, helped her carry her bags inside, and asked her how everything went. "Good," she said, her tone light. "Pretty straightforward trip." I nodded, pretending to accept her lie. But as she unpacked her bag, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, I knew this was far from over. The days following Megan's return were unbearable. Every smile, every word, every gesture felt like a mockery of the life we'd built together. She seemed completely at ease, as if she hadn't just spent days lying to me and meeting another man in a hotel room. Her audacity was infuriating, but I kept my emotions in check. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not until I had everything I needed. I spent my time piecing together the evidence. The listening device had given me plenty, their conversations, his name, the casual intimacy of their interactions. It wasn't just the hotel, they'd gone out together for meals, met in her room multiple times, and even discussed future plans. I wrote down every detail, every timestamp, and backed up the audio files on an external drive. The final piece of the puzzle came when I dug into Chris's background. With his full name, Christopher Lang, I was able to track him down online. He was a software developer, based out of San Francisco, with a profile that matched what Megan had described during her initial excuses. His social media accounts painted a picture of a charming, successful professional, but they also revealed connections to Megan. There were a few pictures of them together at tech events, always part of larger group photos, but one stood out, a candid shot of Megan laughing at something Chris was saying. That evening, I decided it was time to act. I waited until Megan had settled into her usual evening routine: dinner, a glass of wine, and scrolling through her phone on the couch. I joined her, pretending to browse my own phone, but my mind was racing. "How was your trip?" I asked casually, breaking the silence. She glanced up, surprised by the sudden question. "Good. You know, same old work stuff." "Must have been a long drive," I said, my tone light. "You mentioned traffic delays, but I guess you made it eventually." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Yeah, it was brutal. I hate sitting in traffic for hours." Her lie was so smooth, so effortless, that it almost made me doubt what I'd heard on the listening device. "Almost." "Funny," I said, setting my phone down. I checked the traffic reports for that day. There weren't any major delays on your route. Megan stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "Why would you check that?" "Because I wanted to know why you lied to me," I replied, my voice steady. Her expression shifted, a mix of confusion and defiance. "I didn't lie." "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I know you were at the hotel hours before you claimed to be. I know Chris met you there. And I know this wasn't just a business trip." The color drained from her face, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Chris is a colleague. We worked on the app project together, that's all." "Stop," I said firmly. "Don't insult my intelligence, Megan. I've heard everything." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "What do you mean, heard everything?" I pulled out my phone and opened the app connected to the listening device. With a few taps, I played back one of the recordings, her voice, clear as day, greeting Chris as he entered her hotel room. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment, she was speechless. You were spying on me?" "Don't try to turn this around," I snapped. "You lied to me. You met him in secret. What the hell is going on, Megan?" She stood up, pacing the room, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then explain it to me," I said, rising to my feet. "Because right now, it looks like my wife has been sneaking around with another man." Megan stopped pacing and faced me, her expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "I wasn't sneaking around," she insisted. "Chris and we've been working closely on this project. Yes, we met at the hotel, but it was just to go over some final details in person. That's all it was." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You expect me to believe that? After all the lies? After you told me you were stuck in traffic while you were already at the hotel?" She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, unable to come up with an excuse. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" I pressed. "If this was just about work, why lie?" "Because I knew how it would look," she burst out. "You've been so suspicious lately, always questioning me. I didn't want to give you more reasons to doubt me." "Congratulations," I said coldly. "You've succeeded in making me doubt everything." The conversation spiraled from there. Megan stuck to her story, insisting that nothing inappropriate had happened, but her explanations grew weaker with every word. I brought up the emails from Aaron and Chris, the inconsistencies in their stories, the way she'd laughed with Chris during their meetings. She had no answers, no defense. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice breaking.
I can't live like this, constantly wondering if you're being honest with me.
Megan's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy.
Please, she said. Let's talk this through. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I replied. You broke my trust, Megan. And without trust, what's left? That night, I slept in the guest room, unable to face her. The next morning, I called a lawyer.
I wasn't sure yet if I was ready to file for divorce. I woke up to an uneasy silence, the kind that you feel in your chest before your brain fully catches up. It was past 8 a.m., later than I usually slept, but the tension of the past few days had worn me out. I stretched and sat up, taking a moment to process the heavy emptiness that had settled in my chest. Then it hit me, Megan wasn't in the house. At first, I thought maybe she had gone out for a drive or to grab breakfast, but as I glanced outside, the driveway was eerily empty, her car was gone. I walked through the house, checking each room. Nothing. Her clothes were missing from the closet, her toiletries gone from the bathroom. The Megan who'd cried last night about fixing things had disappeared, taking the remnants of her life with her. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a message. Where are you, Megan? She replied almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting. Megan I can't do this anymore. I didn't want to hurt you, but I need to be honest with myself. I've moved in with Chris. I'm sorry. Her words didn't feel real. I stared at the screen, reading them over and over again, hoping the meaning would change. But it didn't. Megan was gone, and she'd chosen Chris. For a while, I just sat there, the phone still in my hand, trying to comprehend how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all hit me at once, leaving me gasping for air. This wasn't just about Megan leaving, it was about the years I'd invested in a life that had been ripped away from me without warning. But Megan wasn't done yet. My phone buzzed again, and I dreaded reading whatever she had to say next. Megan I didn't want it to come to this, but I need to be clear. I'm filing for divorce. If you try to make this difficult or drag it out, I'll have no choice but to take legal action against you for the illegal surveillance. I dropped the phone, my heart racing. Illegal surveillance? The listening device. I hadn't even considered the legal implications when I planted it, too consumed by my need for the truth. And now Megan was using it against me, delivering one final blow to ensure she had the upper hand. I paced the living room, the weight of her threat suffocating me. She'd turned the tables completely. Not only had she betrayed me, but now she was trying to paint herself as the victim, the one being wronged. The irony was almost unbearable. For the next hour, I went through every possible scenario in my head. If Megan followed through with her threat, the consequences could be devastating, not just legally, but personally and professionally. My job in IT required a clean record, and even the hint of a lawsuit could ruin me. But there was also the matter of principle. How could I let her walk away from this unscathed, as if she hadn't spent months lying to me, sneaking around, and destroying our marriage? Every fiber of my being wanted to fight back, to expose her for what she'd done. But at what cost? After pacing for what felt like hours, I forced myself to sit down and think rationally. If Megan wanted to file for divorce, there wasn't much I could do to stop her. But the surveillance accusation, that was something I needed to handle carefully. I called Dan, my closest friend and the one person I could trust with this mess. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, man," he said. "What's up?" "Megan's gone," I said flatly. There was a pause on the other end. "Gone? What do you mean?" "She left," I explained, my voice shaking. "Moved in with Chris. And now she's threatening to take legal action because of the listening device." "Jesus," Dan muttered. "That's a lot." "No kidding," I snapped, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know what to do. If she goes to the cops or files a complaint, it could ruin everything." Dan was quiet for a moment before responding. "Look, first things first, do not contact her directly about this. Anything you say could be used against you. You need a lawyer. Like, yesterday."
I already talked to one, I said.
But this changes everything.
What do I even say? Hi, my wife cheated on me, so I bugged her bag, and now she's threatening to sue me?
It's not ideal, Dan admitted. But you're not the first guy to get blindsided by this kind of crap.
The important thing is to stay calm and be strategic. Let the lawyer handle it. That afternoon, I scheduled an urgent meeting with my attorney.
He was a sharp, no-nonsense type, the kind of guy who didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid everything out for him: the affair, the listening device, Megan's threat. "You've put yourself in a precarious position," he said after I finished.
"But it's not hopeless.
Surveillance laws vary by state, and depending on how the device was used, there's a chance we can argue that it was within your rights as her spouse to monitor activity in your shared home." "But I planted it in her bag," I admitted, feeling a fresh wave of guilt.
He sighed, rubbing his temples. "That complicates things. If she can prove it, and if the recordings include private conversations that weren't meant to be overheard, it could be classified as a violation of privacy."
"She's the one who lied and cheated," I said, my frustration boiling over.
"How is she the victim here?"
"That's the legal system," he replied.
"It doesn't care about emotions or morality, it cares about facts. And right now, the fact is that you recorded her without her knowledge."
1 week later, I received the official notice: Megan had filed for divorce. Her demands were clear: she wanted the house and financial support. I stared at the document for a long time, the words blurring together. This was it, the end of everything I'd fought so hard to build. But as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going down without a fight. The air in the lawyer's office was heavy, suffocating even. I sat across from him, my hands gripping the edge of the chair as he delivered the blow I'd been dreading. His tone was calm, almost clinical, but it didn't make his words any easier to hear.
"After reviewing everything, including the recordings, I have to be blunt," he said.
"Your actions technically fall into a gray area of the law, but Megan's lawyer will almost certainly argue that it was a clear violation of privacy.
If this goes to court, the consequences could be severe. Jail time is unlikely, but not impossible.
At the very least, you'd face fines and a tarnished reputation." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the weight of his words sank in.
"So, what are you saying?"
"I just give her what she wants."
He nodded. "I understand this is unfair. She's the one who broke your trust, but the legal system doesn't see it that way.
Her lawyer knows they have leverage, and they're using it. If you fight this, it'll only drag out the process, and the longer it drags, the worse it could get for you personally and professionally."
"And the house?"
I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated before replying. "She's made it clear that the house is a non-negotiable demand. If you don't agree to her terms, she'll pursue the privacy violation in court. You need to decide what's more important, holding onto the house or avoiding potential legal consequences." I closed my eyes, the reality of my situation hitting me like a freight train. Megan had betrayed me, shattered our marriage, and now she was trying to take the home we'd built together. The injustice of it all made my blood boil, but what choice did I have? The thought of a legal battle that could cost me my job, my reputation, and my freedom was too much to bear. That evening, I sat alone in the living room of the house I was about to lose. The walls felt like they were closing in, the memories they held now tainted by betrayal and bitterness. I thought about the countless nights Megan and I had spent here, laughing, arguing, planning our future. It had all seemed so solid, so permanent. And now it was slipping through my fingers. The thought of handing it over to her, of her and Chris living here, filling this space with their new life, was almost unbearable. But the alternative was worse. If I fought, I'd lose everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him to proceed with the settlement. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded and said he'd handle the paperwork. "It's the right decision," he assured me, though his words brought little comfort. Megan's terms were straightforward: she would take the house and all shared assets within it. I could keep my savings and personal belongings, but she wanted the majority of the furniture, appliances, and other items we'd bought together. She also demanded that I pay for half the legal fees, claiming that I was responsible for escalating the situation by planting the listening device. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I agreed to everything. I just wanted it to end. Over the next few weeks, I packed up my belongings, each box a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. I took only what I absolutely needed: clothes, important documents, a few sentimental items. Everything else stayed. The house felt emptier with each passing day, the echoes of our shared life fading as I stripped it down to its bare bones.
Megan didn't return while I was packing, which was a small mercy.
Her lawyer coordinated the logistics, ensuring that we wouldn't have to see each other during the process. But even without her presence, the betrayal lingered like a shadow in every corner of the house. On my last day in the house, I walked through each room one final time. The kitchen where we'd cooked countless meals together. The living room where we'd spent lazy Sundays binge-watching shows. The bedroom where we'd shared moments of intimacy and vulnerability, moments that now felt like lies. I ended my walk in the backyard, sitting on the steps of the patio with a beer in hand. This had been my sanctuary, the place where I'd unwind after long days at work. It was hard to believe that tomorrow, it would no longer be mine. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer: "Megan has signed the agreement.
The settlement is finalized."
It was over.